Oh, yeah.
All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Elson. I'm one of the members of the Adult Faith Ministry team, and I am happy to kick off the Adult Forum Program year this morning with a presentation information about the Crop Hunger Walk. As we know, we lost the remarkable Kathy Tanabe this past year, and we all know how committed she was to so much that made a difference to so many. Doing something about hunger and food insecurity in not only southeast Minnesota but throughout the world was important to her, and she taught us here at Mount Olive how important that was and to get involved as well. In fact, this month here at Mount Olive is dedicated to presenting information to our congregation in the many ways we can make a difference in this area. With us today is Joan Leoff. Joan is a member of the Peace United Church of Christ and has been working with the organizing committee of the Rochester Area Crop Hunger Walk since 1996. Wow. Joan has been on 2 trips with the Church World Service, the first to Guatemala and Honduras in 2009, and the second to Northern Vietnam in early 2013. Joan said these were learning-style trips with the purpose being to see firsthand projects funded by Crop Walk dollars. And I am guessing what she saw and learned on those trips was extraordinary. So please welcome Joan Leoff.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be here to talk to you about our upcoming Crop Hunger Walk and also the sponsoring organization, Church World Service. So thanks for having me here today. And Kathy served with the organizing team since 2005 and was a dear friend. So I know how supportive you were of her through her journey, so I appreciate that. This is a very lovely picture, but I'm going to skip it and maybe come back to that in just a minute. I want to talk just for a minute about Church World Service, the sponsoring organization of crop walks. It was founded in 1946, and that was post-World War II, and it was started as a way for Midwestern farmers to share their grain with post-World War II Europe and Asia for people suffering from the aftermaths of that war. CROP was an acronym for Christian Rural Overseas Programs. It's not used so much as that acronym anymore, but that's sort of the history of how Church World Service started. Now it's a cooperative ministry of 37 Christian denominations, of which the ELCA and the United Church of Christ, of which I'm a member, are partners. Church World Service works around the world basically in 3 different kinds of programs. One is refugee resettlement, and most of those programs are funded by government grants. A second way the Church World Service works is through refugee resettlement, and that can be around the world, and it can also be in the United States, responding to disasters, but in more of a long-term way than the initial Red Cross kind of immediate response. And then the third way that Church World Service works is through sustainable development, and those are the kind of projects that our Crop Walk dollars are used to fund, and those are the kind of projects that my husband and I visited on our trips. Now, crop walks are interfaith fundraising and educational events sponsored by Church World Service. So Church World Service is the organization. Crop walks are fundraising community events that take place around the country. They have impact on local hunger, and that 25% of the funds raised goes to a local food response agency, and you probably know that we designate Channel 1 to receive that local portion of our crop walk dollars. The other 75% has a global focus to empower people to meet their own needs. So the most recent trip that I was on was to northern Vietnam in 2013. I want to mention up front that we travelers paid for the trip from our personal funds. No crop walk dollars were used to pay for our travel, in case that's in the back of your head. But these were learning style trips. They weren't a working style trip or a mission style trip where we go and do things for other people. These were for us to see firsthand the kind of projects that are being funded through church world service, and then the purpose and the hope being that we could come back and share that we saw with others in our community. So we were in northern Vietnam in the early part of 2013. That's winter there, but you can tell it's a milder winter than we have here. There were a group of 8 of us on this trip to northern Vietnam. It's a long journey to get to the other side of the planet. But we flew from Minneapolis to Seoul, South Korea, and then to Hanoi. Spent the night, and then flew to the western part of the country, and then traveled by van. Most of us in this room probably are familiar with Vietnam from the war in the 60s and 70s. It's a long, narrow country, over 1,000 miles long. It's about 89 million people. Church World Service is focusing its work in the northern part of the country, so that's this map is just in the very top region of Vietnam, and it's working in 2 different districts or provinces in Vietnam, La Chao and then also Tai Nguyen. We visited villages in La Chao. You can notice it's very far northwestern Vietnam. It borders China. This was called the frontier region. Not many outsiders visit this part of the country. Traveling is difficult. The roads are not in good condition. The CWS staff had to get permission from the government to take us into these villages. They're mostly made up of ethnic minorities and very probably haven't seen Westerners before. It's very poor. Vietnam is a poor country with the average annual income under $500, but in this area, it's under $200 a year. Stop me if you have questions along the way. So I mentioned the roads are difficult, and this was on our way to visit our very first village. I was wondering if we would actually make it because the road had been taken out by a rock slide. This was our first experience on this trip where we had to get out of the van and walk for a while, and then the van tries to make its way with a lighter load through the rocks here. Then we did make it, and we had to walk up then from the road up to the village. So this was a village that had a Thai ethnic origin. And I included this slide as an illustration of how Church World Service starts its presentation of our project to a community. And the villagers were gathered around together, and then the staff members were giving an overview, some education, some background on what the project was. And I want to point out that the staff members, and this was the project manager, this young man, in the Vietnam were Vietnamese. It's not white Westerners coming in to direct or tell the communities what they need or how to do it. It's local people. And I would argue that this means the projects are going to be more successful and sustainable for the long haul. This lesson was on composting. And I don't think it's too hard of a stretch to understand how composting relates to hunger. In our crop hunger walks, compost is used to enrich the soil, keep it healthy, increase your productivity of your gardens and your agriculture. The very first step after they did the overview was to demonstrate them how to build a compost pile. The first thing was to go gather vegetation and chop it up. And that's what we see women doing here, just from right around the village itself. Another ingredient to this compost pile was hog manure, and the village had hogs, so that was very accessible. And then they demonstrated how to put the compost pile together. And they started by putting a layer of that green chopped vegetation down, shoveling on some hog manure, watering it, and then repeating the layers until you had a large pile like this. The pile would be watered and turned over an 18-day period, and at the end of the 18 days, it's ready to be used to enrich their soil. Some common features of this project with other CWS projects are that it's local. The villagers aren't having to go out and find funds to buy anything to make this project work. It's organic, and it's a sustainable kind of project for this village. The next kind of project that we saw was around the issue of sanitation. And we visited a Lahu village. This was going to be the very first meeting of church world service with this village. It currently had no facilities at all. People went to the bathroom out wherever. And they were suffering disease and illness as a result of their water supply being contaminated. This project was an aha moment for me, connecting the dots between crop hunger dollars and long-term development work. You might wonder, how are they connected? And that was a question we posed to the Hanoi staff at the end of our trip. Why don't we saw villagers suffering, lethargic and not looking very healthy, and they were malnourished. Why don't we also supply food to them? And the answer was, you really need to address the root cause of this malnutrition, and that's their contaminated water supply and lack of sanitation. So Church World Service is there to address that root cause, and if you can get their water supply cleaner and the villagers healthier, they'll be able to absorb the nutrients of the food that they have. So I thought it was interesting how they began this meeting, and it was to map out the village using some string and pieces of paper, and the villagers marked within this red string representing the borders of the village. They marked like where their houses were, and then they used a different colored string to mark where the nearby river is and where the road is. And the last thing they did was designate where it was that they went to the bathroom. Basically, these pieces of paper outside of the village border there. The next part of that lesson was how basically flies go from open waste to the nearby water source, and the water gets contaminated. So here we've got a little piece of paper designating some open waste. They had a glass of water designating their water supply. They used a piece of hair going from the waste to the water, and then demonstrate how you're drinking that dirty, contaminated water and getting sick. There was some shock value built into this demonstration to try to help educate the villagers. These are long-term habits, though, that the villagers have. They know nothing different. They talked to the villagers about the cost of having sick members that they need to take to the clinic, and they didn't talk about the cost in terms of dollars, but they said it was costing them about 10 large pigs a year by having people suffering from those diseases. The final step was to give families an opportunity to sign up to participate. And what they did was would put down their name and a date by which they committed themselves to digging a hole in the ground and using that hole as where they go to the bathroom. And if at the end of 3 months that family has changed those long-held habits, Church World Service will then help to build a more permanent latrine facility for that family. A parting gift to each of the families was a little bag of candy and a bar of soap, soap being an essential ingredient to good hygiene. And again, this is the gentleman that traveled with us while we were in Vietnam. He's the project manager. He visits each of these villages about once a month. And then when we had been back home about in May, one of the members of our group emailed the Hanoi office and said, "How's it going? It's been about 3 months. Is it working?" And they said, yes and no, it can take a long time. The Church World Service will be there encouraging these families along the way. But there were some who had successfully, used the hole and changed their habits, and this was a facility that had been built for that family. This was a picture I'd taken in Guatemala, and somehow the two just seemed very similar to me. But that was the sanitation project that we got to see. And again, it really was an aha moment for me, connecting the dots between us raising money for hunger and long-term development. This was a latrine that had been built by Church World Service in 2006 in another village that had started this a number of years ago. It's made of concrete. It's a dry latrine. There's no running water. There was no smell. It was very clean. The third kind of project that we saw related to education. So hunger isn't just a matter of not having enough food. It can be a complicated issue. Maybe poverty is the reason you're hungry, and education can be a way to bring families out of poverty. So Church World Service is involved in education in this very poor district of Mount. And this was a village kindergarten that we saw that was built by Church World Service. There you can see the CWS sign there. The village kindergarten is right in the middle of the community. It's got 3 to 5-year-old kids attending it. They don't have to go very far to go to school, so it's accessible to all of the village kids. We also visited a grade school and a middle school. This was a library built by Church World Service. It's maintained by the students, but the facility was funded by Church World Service. And here were some outdoor libraries. This is this one and this one we actually saw. It's winter, but still they can use it. It's pretty mild winter by our standards. We also saw vegetable gardens that were planted and tended by the students, but led by Church World Service. The gardens added to the food supply of the schools. They also taught skills to the children about how to grow a garden, and those are skills that can be taken back to their family and village. I think these are pretty nice looking gardens myself. And then Church World Service builds dorms. So when you get beyond kindergarten, your school might not be right in your village, and you might have to travel a distance to get to it. It might be too far away for a daily commute, and in that case, students need a dorm. So in this school, 39 out of the 150 students board. There was a hand washing station in the school, so hygiene is an important lesson that's taught through the schools. Here are latrine facilities being built by Church World Service at a school. And these were posters we saw everywhere on the importance of hand washing, how to do hand washing, the kind of disease and illness that can result as a result of poor hygiene. And then another way that Church World Service works in northern Vietnam is through their health clinics. We weren't able to visit a health clinic, but I wanted to include these slides to talk about just for a minute. The first village that we visited, that Thai village where they were learning about composting, had a village health worker who had gone through a 6-month training with Church World Service. But they also do traditional birth attendant training, and that's a 5-day training. These were Church World Service billboards that we passed. Saw a number of them on our driving time. They're looking pretty beaten and weathered, but I wanted to illustrate that Church World Service is there for the long haul. They've been in Vietnam since 1954. The next couple of slides are just to give you a flavor of our trip and the roads that we traveled. Here the van was actually sliding into a ditch, and I got out, and the guys worked for a bit to keep the van from sliding into the ditch and try to get it on its way up the hill. More difficult roads, and this was not the rainy season for them. I just can't even imagine what it's like in the summer, or the project manager traveling each month to all of these villages on these roads. We had a professional driver. It wasn't the project manager doing the driving, and at first I wondered, why do we need a professional? Well, here's why we need a professional driver. This is just one of the beautiful views we had. Very, very mountainous. We had a little time for sightseeing, and the snake one was just like, oh my, you know. And here's my husband who couldn't be with, he's up north this weekend and couldn't be here, but he didn't try this with one of the other members of our group. Some of the food that we ate, it was nutritious, it was healthy, maybe not the favorite food we've ever eaten, but very, very healthy. They don't cook with a lot of fat in their diet, so some of the meat might, like the chunks of pork, might have just big slabs of fat in them and pieces of bone. So it's not your chicken McNugget that you're eating here. The chicken would just be cut up with bones and everything, but it was healthy and nutritious. We didn't have like glasses of water or drink, anything to drink with the meal. But at the end of the meal, they brought out these bowls of water, and it was the vegetable broth that they had used from what the vegetables had been cooked in. So this water had been boiled, and it had the nutrients of the vegetables in it. So that's what they did. I also wanted to include some slides from the trip that we took in 2009 to Central America. We visited the countries of Guatemala and Honduras. And these projects were pretty easily related, for the most part, to food security. So that was one contrast between the two trips. In Vietnam, it was more development work. In Central America, it was pretty easily related to food security. Another difference between the two was that in Central America, Church World Service is working with existing partner agencies that have common missions. This prevents duplication of effort, it's more efficient. In Vietnam, Church World Service was working directly with the villagers and through the governments. So we saw a number of, we visited families here, and in Central America we were eating in the homes of the families we visited, and it felt like such an honor to be there and to be their guests. But we visited a number of greenhouses that were built with the help of Church World Service, and these are being built in the mountains of Guatemala, where it's otherwise too cold or cool to grow tomatoes. The tomatoes add another food item to their food supply, and they also provide a cash crop for the families. Notice the terracing, so this is in the mountains. We also saw projects on how to make organic insecticides and using local ingredients. That's what we're seeing here in this picture. Notice again who's leading the projects, doing the teaching. It's members of the local communities. Here we're, this guy's name is Roberto. He's one of the staff members of the partner agency, telling how they convert old used tires, turn them inside out, and use them as containers for making mulch. Again, the soil quality can be poor, and mulch will help enrich that. We saw projects about the use of composting redworms, again, trying to help improve the soil quality and the production of their gardens and agriculture. So these redworms rapidly convert your kitchen waste, or even we saw one farm where they positioned rabbit cages right over these redworms, and the rabbit manure would be converted to compost with the use of these redworms. Were any of you in 4-H when you were children? I was. This really harkened back to the age of those 4-H meetings where demonstrations were given by the kids. Here we saw a lesson on nutrition. They're talking about the food groups and how you need diversity to your diet. And then also giving them recipes on how to use the vegetables that they may not be accustomed to having in their diet. We visited a farm that had a tilapia pond. This was in Honduras. These villages didn't have electricity. So the tilapia would be a food source for the family, but also they would harvest it using these circular nets and tossing them into the pond. And that tilapia was a cash crop. This really reminds me of the saying, give a person a fish and they've got food for a meal, but give them a fishing pole and they, it's a long-term kind of help. This tilapia pond reminded me of that saying. It's getting dark in Honduras, but we got one last project in, and this is, I labeled it a manure to methane project, but there's this concrete trough built like down the hill from a home, and inside it will be a heavy-duty plastic container in which hog manure is placed, and the methane gas that's produced from that hog manure is then piped up to the home, and it's used to fuel their stove. This frees the family up from having to gather firewood. It provides them with some energy, and it also addresses the problem of deforestation. This was a demonstration farm that we visited that's owned by a woman named Daisy, and she was an amazing woman, not afraid to try anything new. And so her farm was used as a demonstration for other people learning about some of the projects. And I think we talked a little bit when I was introduced about what food security is, and that's having a reliable quantity and variety of food to provide for a healthy diet. So all of these projects we saw, you can pretty easily understand how they're related to food security. We also saw some weaving that some of the very remote villages in Guatemala, the women were weaving, and those textiles were taken to market to provide some cash. So those conclude the slides that I brought with me from the 2 trips that we took, and I'm going to conclude by proposing some reasons I think it's a really good idea to support the work of Church World Service. And one is that local participants determine for themselves what projects they need and prioritize them and decide how they'll be implemented. And this was a picture taken from a calendar we were given. And what it is the village women voting with kernels of corn on what projects they want to do and which first. Projects are led and implemented by trained locals. I think I pointed that out several times. Here's the Hanoi staff, almost all of them native Vietnamese. Here are the staff working in that Moutet district. They actually live in that town. It's just too hard, you can't get there commuting. Third, the projects address the root causes of a problem and implement sustainable organic solutions. For example, the lack of sanitation contributing to disease and malnutrition. And finally, crop hugger walks bring together the faith community. This is sort of a rare opportunity for us to work together, to find common ground. And it's I think it's a great way to do global outreach, to empower other people to become independent. And we walk because they walk. The average person in a developing country walks about 6 miles a day to get their food, water, firewood, and to take their goods to market. So we're walking in solidarity with those, our neighbors around the world. This was a banner that some of the crop walkers signed in 2012 at our fall walk. And we took that and presented that to the Hanoi staff. So we've got a piece of Rochester there in Vietnam. And here's Hanoi. So crop walks are a way for us to work together, and I will forever treasure my friendship with her. I think Sarah has.
Thank you. Ask for questions.
After Sarah, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to.
Thank you for being here. And yes, we know. We know our dear friend Kathy and how much this crop walk was dear to her heart. And so I, again, invite you to come and walk. Next Sunday, we're walking. And we can walk together and feel that 6-mile walk together. As well, I have pins that you'll see that we're selling for $5. $1 is to pay for the pin, but $4 will go to Crop Walk, and then we have a donation envelope where you can get your own sheet and collect donations for the Crop Walk as well from the Mount Olive team. And it hold this very dear to my heart when Joan and I spoke. It was when I first met Kelly when I came here. It was her sitting at that crop walk and visiting with the youth, and they had many dialogues with the youth about what is a good way of finding needs to help countries that are suffering from hunger. And she talked about people would bring up projects, and she just really kept that dialogue alive, and I am so forever grateful. So I'll be out at the table, and I'll let you ask questions for Joan.
So do we have any questions? I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but I can try. Yeah.
I was wondering about, like in Vietnam, the literacy in general. Is that?
Yeah.
I saw there was education for children.
Yeah. I
are
don't
the
know. I
adults
don't know
able-
the statistics, but education in those remote villages is difficult. So I don't know how many students make it, say, to high school. And I think it tapers off. For one thing, access to those schools as they get further away from the home is harder. So, yeah, it's really a goal of Church World Service, though, to get more students into the schools so that they have a better chance of supporting themselves. Yeah.
Does Crop Walk or World Services, do they partner at all with other groups to like bring in, say, healthcare or like literacy training and that kind of stuff in
Yeah.
other groups? Or is it
They
kind of
were-
a separate entity that goes into an area?
Well, it depends on the area of the world. So in Vietnam, Church World Service is working directly with the villages and through the government. And there really aren't many NGOs in Vietnam. Church World Service is one of the only. So in Vietnam, it's not working with partner agencies. But in Central America, it is. And so we met with 3 or 4 of the partner agencies that got to see that partnership. We traveled in Central America with, there's a staff person that works in that part of the world, but he has a close relationship with the partner agencies. So try to prevent duplication of effort. So we got to see both kinds of outreach. Anybody else? Yeah.
You showed us the food you ate in Vietnam. Could you talk a little bit about your accommodations? You weren't exactly a 3-star hotel.
No, but they were fine in Vietnam. We stayed in. They were not fancy, but they had electricity and we had hot water. The village of Mount Olive, where we stayed, had electricity for 2 years, so not very long, but it did. So we stayed in decent, clean hotels in Vietnam. In Central America, it was less. It was fine, but it was a different experience. It was very interesting. So in Guatemala, you had hot water, but it was through, they called it a widowmaker. So it was like this electrical unit on right by your shower head. You're not supposed to touch it while you're showering, but not a lot of hot water, but some. And because Guatemala, interestingly, had electricity, but no heat. So it was cool at night in those mountains, maybe in the 40s. There was a fire in one of the like cabin kind of type of facilities that we stayed in Guatemala. In Honduras, well, all I can say is it was an experience. The first night in Honduras, I pulled back my blanket and there were bugs. It was creepy, gross. And so and there had been a scorpion in one of the cabins, so we slept in our clothes and I put my socks over my pant legs and just had the creeps all night long. And then they moved us to another place, but it was very interesting, but certainly not fancy, but part of the experience. But the hospitality of the people everywhere was just amazing. And in Central America, eating the food that was prepared by the families, they're cooking this wedding soup, which is a treat. And through the funds that we paid for our trips, they were reimbursed for the food, but still they're working, they're gathering the firewood and building the fire, and they're cooking for us. Those of us who cook for groups knows that's work. It really felt special, and then eating in their homes, which were very modest. It felt like a real privilege to go visit their homes. Yeah.
What are the challenges with the school, maybe not just structurally, but for teachers and so forth, supporting that? How is that?
What are some of the challenges of the school?
As far as the community's sound and supporting the teachers and so forth.
Well, I know Church World Service is working to increase attendance. So I think there can be a struggle getting that commitment of the families to send their kids to school. And one of the things that we visited was lessons that were related to their culture. So we saw kids making musical instruments and learning embroidery, and I'm trying to think of some of the other, but it was to demonstrate and having actually, like we saw mothers in there helping lead these lessons so that they wouldn't feel like their children are losing their culture. So some cultural enrichment classes being a part of the curriculum as a way to encourage participation in the schools. I can't imagine, I couldn't imagine sending, I have 4 kids, they're in their 20s now, but sending my grade schoolers to board, you know, I think that would be hard. And they said, you know, you've got the kids cry at first, but within a month or 2, they're happy. And I have to say the teachers that we saw with these kids were very loving. You know, we'd see them knelt down by little ones giving hugs, so that felt good. Not sure if I really answered your question.
Thank you very much, Snoop.
I hope to see you next week.
Well, there was a lot of, we saw a lot of parties
Yep.
being held. Streets, lots of
And I suppose they weren't recognized in any way, so